We are incredibly excited about this webinar today. And the reason is that it's just such an interesting topic, and a topic that frankly we've been talking about in the industry for the last, 20 years or so, but it really has come full circle to today's day and age because of this situation where we have had a lot of pressure to keep costs under control, while yet our world is also not slowing down in terms of the level of focus we have on not only governance, things like ESG, as well as regulations coming, cybersecurity programs that are needing to be amped up. And all of that being said, is what our discussion topic is going to be is about how to really take the work that we know we have to do, the cost of compliance, the cost of being able to perform those controls, monitor those controls, and attest to those controls. How do we keep up with that for the sake that we can really reduce that cost while still providing our business leaders with the visibility that they need in terms of understanding their regulatory compliance status, as well as their level of risk. So join us today in this conversation, and we're really looking forward to the discussion. Some of you on the call may be thinking, what are you talking about continuous compliance? What exactly is control modernization? We're just going to give you a little bit of a lay of the land into what we mean by this topic and where we're coming from the guise of ServiceNow addressing this topic, along with Edgile from a people process perspective. We're going to go into really a big fan of, instead of just talking at you and saying, hey, this is conceptually what we mean in this topic, we're going to show you what we mean. So we've got really great examples that I think will be near and dear to your heart, because they're popular topics that I know as a former Deloitte auditor would always seem to come up on that audit report. So we'll go through some examples of what we mean by being able to do continuous compliance, performance, and reporting. And we'll talk about, okay, this all sounds great, but does the ROI actually prove that this is a good investment of time? So we're going to discuss really what are the benefits that your organization can expect in trying to achieve this journey. And at the end of the day, how do you get started? So Edgile has done this time and time again. So they're going to walk you through their pro tips of how really you can progress through this. So that is our plan for today. So by the purposes of introduction, before you figure out here what the topic is, let's just introduce our team here. So my name is Kathleen Randall. I am a director. I run the Central and West group for what's called a risk business unit, which is incorporating the integrated risk management solutions for ServiceNow. I've been in the space for as long as I can remember. I don't want to say the age to date myself, but cut my teeth as a Deloitte auditor and have been with a few vendors over the years, even before the space was called GRC and now called IRM. Brian Risman, my favorite partner, don't tell anybody that, he's going to here kick off and introduce the Edgile team.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kathleen, and great to be with you this afternoon. Everyone, thanks for joining us as well. This is Brian Risman speaking from Edgile, joined by a few of my colleagues, David Decter, Jay Dial, and Giovanni Sparazio. Myself and David, we're the two practice partners that look after Edgile's ServiceNow risk and security practice. Jay is our lead senior manager, who looks after our solutions from a ServiceNow IRM perspective, and Giovanni Sparazio is one of our lead senior consultants. So at Edgile, we really do three things. We have a big ServiceNow practice focused exclusively in the risk and the security space. David and myself made a decision about three and a half years ago or so to move our entire practice in the space to working exclusively with ServiceNow. So we'll spend a few minutes talking about why we made that decision and why there's a lot of benefits, if you will, that you can receive from being on the ServiceNow platform. We also have two other lines of business that are complementary. We have a cloud security business largely wrapped around Microsoft. We also have an identity and access management business that's largely wrapped around SailPoint. What's really great, though, is that we're bringing a lot of those worlds together back into ServiceNow. So if you think about where a lot of your risks might exist as an organization, a lot of those are identity risks. So how can we take those identity controls like user access reviews, segregation of duties, automate those, and bring some value back with ServiceNow being that front end. So we'll talk about some of those examples as we get into the demo. So we're really looking forward to being here. And Kathleen, thanks very much for inviting us to join you today.
Absolutely. Very much looking forward to hearing your tools of the trade here. So let's get into the discussion. So just for the purposes of where we're coming from, this conversation is really about the marriage of how technology and practices can really help to support this concept that we'll call continuous compliance, continuous performance. But for all intents and purposes, some of you on the phone may not be familiar with the ServiceNow brand. So let me just take a few minutes here just to describe really our company and our approach. At the core of it, our solutions here that we provide at ServiceNow is really workflow-based solutions that facilitate the processes, the workflows, the programs of the heart of the business. So whether that is ticketing from a service management perspective, customer service, call agent support, field operations support, HR, legal, et cetera, really are the backbone, and we're geared towards understanding what is the fabric of the business and facilitating the workflows that make operations work. To the next slide, really the reason why that's important here in this world of integrated risk management is that we all know here on the call, because we're practitioners, that risk, compliance, and audit ramifications really live in every workflow of the business. So that is really why at ServiceNow, we're positioned that when we want to achieve this goal of continuous compliance and continuous risk, we would rather see that really embedded in the day-to-day operations of the business rather than after the fact. And what we achieve through that is predictive. So within our world, we really focus on this concept of how do we support your second and third line of defense, whose purpose is to really govern the programs of policy management, compliance, being able to drive the risk aspects of digital and transformational incentives and programs at the company. That can extend from operational risk and compliance all the way to your ecosystem, supply chain, third parties. We have to make sure that we can keep the business running, resilience, continuity, disaster recovery, especially this last year and a half that's taught us nothing else, but is to make sure of how do we enable our business to keep the lights on, be nimble when a lot of different things are changing in the market landscape, geopolitical landscape, and the climate. And overall, we've got to make sure that we're doing that in a way that is of the interest of the public and being good stewards of the public's information, privacy, ESG. But all of that being said is when we enable these capabilities at ServiceNow, we enable them with the power of being able to drive workflows with an engine that has been incredible from an R&D perspective to support all the ServiceNow portfolio. But in the ways of risk and compliance and audit, we drive those chatbots, virtual agents, to drive maximum engagement from your first line. We use capabilities like predictive analytics and machine-based learning to give you the idea of what you want to see around the corner, not just what happened in the past. So how do you really get ahead of any threats coming to the business? And we all do that within a single database backend. So what I mean by that is that our ability to connect risk, compliance, and audit implications to the business is inherent in the back end of the system throughout all the information we're collecting throughout other business workflows, so that we can provide maximum context for those of you on the call who like are sitting in the second and third line of defense. Next slide. So the reason why this is important within the discussion is that you really need a modern platform to be able to drive what will unpack into continuous compliance. Why? Because what we're going to discuss today is how do you take the work out of compliance? How do you take the work out of the people who are actually performing day-to-day operations? And honestly, their last thing they want to do at the end of the day is go gather a bunch of evidence for auditors. So how do we engage them? And but also, how do we engage our employees, our customers, our vendor managers, our vendors, suppliers, to be able to be proactive in letting us know where there's risk and compliance issues rather than reactive? That's where chatbots comes in, a user experience. And at the end of the day, all this information has to drive with really strong integration abilities so that we can collect data from multiple points, multiple systems at the organization. No company runs on just one platform, and we understand that. So we have to be able to leverage those different sources of the truth in a way that we can action it throughout risk and compliance. And at the end of the day, we really have to drive this through an ecosystem. We're all in this together. So it's really important that we've got very strong partners in our ecosystem like Edgile who can really bring the solution to light with working with your business, your people, your programs in order to really realize this goal that we have within continuous compliance and monitoring. Next slide. So what we're going to do within this discussion, let me just give you a definition here. So continuous controls, performance, and monitoring. What do we mean by that? How do you take risk, compliance, and audit and put it a part of the day-to-day activities? When you have a call center agent who's taking information, they likely have to have requirements to make sure that they're handling that customer data intake in a way that's compliant with not only their state's privacy laws, but also the state in which that customer lives in. So how do we actually make sure that that requirement is being done within the time that that job is being performed, and make sure that that risk and compliance data is available to those who need to understand those impacts on a day-to-day basis in, again, the second and third line of defense. That's really what we mean by continuous compliance, performance, and reporting. Take the work out of those who have to perform the compliance and risk duties in the first place, but also make it really easy to get 100% reliance for those who are monitoring those statuses, so they don't have to do, you know, audit by selection and getting a sample size of 20 to be able to do some entire compliance posture. That doesn't make any sense with today's day and age with where we are at data and compute. We should be able to do it better, and we are doing it better here at ServiceNow. Next slide. So what is the result of all this? We want to shift really the view of compliance and audited risk to be not those who are kind of watching over shoulder at the organization to make sure we're doing the right thing at any given point in time, but how do we take this information to arm our business in a way that they can make better decisions on how to operate? Wouldn't it be interesting if your plant managers could see on a daily basis what kind of operational risk and compliance issues they're having, so that they can maximize what that plant production is for the day to be able to drive the best output, best revenue, while making sure that they're being cognizant of any threats coming at them? That is really what we call risk-informed decisions here at ServiceNow. Next slide. So as we get to this discussion here today, let me kind of set the stage into what is happening. And again, I'm hoping those on the call are going to get a lot of head shaking, because really the way that we've gone about compliance programs today, SOX being one of the 32 programs that I know financial organizations have to abide by, and the numbers just keep growing. You start looking at different industries. Traditionally, the way we do compliance monitoring, audit monitoring, if you will, is that we take a very traditional approach. We have a list of controls that are mapped to regulations that we care about. We start to do sample testing throughout the year where we can identify, how are we doing these controls? Are we doing what we say we're doing? Do we have processes that actually state that this is performing in reality? And then we want to test to make sure that what the business is telling us they are doing, they're actually doing day in, day out. And we have to make sure that all that information, of course, is evidenced, so that in the case that you need to perform an audit, that you can really substantiate the fact of you say what you say you're doing. When you think of all those different types of activities, we did an analysis in looking at Protiviti and a few other Big Four's data that they've really collected from a very large database. And that comes down to about 30 hours for control. You can see that chart there and what constitutes that 30 hours. 30 hours per one control annually. Now, what does that mean in terms of dollars? You've got on typical, and again, I'm only talking about Sarbanes-Oxley, right? Not unusual that you would have probably about 400, roughly 500 controls that are your key controls you're testing for SOX. And I don't just mean in IT, I mean across the business, not GCC controls, but business process controls. When you talk about internal resources doing the work of the box that you see on the left-hand pane, $75 an hour, fully loaded cost. What does that mean? You're spending a little bit over the $2,000 on each SOX control. And that's just from internal basis. So let me kind of flip the switch here in terms of what the broader vision looks like on the next slide. So when we actually took this to a customer, I was trying to really test, okay, is this data right? I don't really believe data until I kind of see it with my own eyes. We walked through this customer's organization. It's a large global organization. They're primarily in the financial space. But what we found is that, you know, when they looked at, they had a deployment of ServiceNow. They were using ServiceNow in terms of housing their main CMDB, those assets, being able to understand the impact and the relationship of those assets and processes as it supports the business. And what they did is they really ran a continuous compliance effort to try to reduce the time that they would spend primarily on their IT controls to start with, so that they can really drive towards an evidence of resilience. And here's what was really interesting here in terms of the cost and the so what of the impact. So again, only IT controls. They found out that 68% of those controls, when they looked at their whole risk register, controls framework, if you will, what they could automate, they were able to take 68% of those and really drive towards a continuous workflow process. That's 68% of those controls that they really could take out from manual effort and drive that via automation. 24% of those technology controls in this stage, which is not a small number, 132 for this particular organization, they were able to get to that state in less than 6 months. And without saying too much, I'll tell you where they started with was Microsoft Office. So they really didn't even have a system of records. So it's really phenomenal results in a short period of time. What did they get from that? Yes, they had tangible benefits in terms of the dollars saved, but they really got real-time insight into where their current status was. And at a beginning point in time, they could have a regular show up on a moment's notice. They had to be audit-proof at every given point in time. But they were able to report to the board of directors that they saved about $8 million in cost reduction through even just looking at one of those aspects of the program, which for them was the most easy to measure, which is through third-party relationships, really monitoring those operational aspects that they were able to reduce. And most importantly, when you look at this cost for them was just shy of $15,000 per control when you look at the external audit costs as well as internal performance, overhead, keeping systems up to date, et cetera, and those different workflow processes. For most companies, if you're not highly regulated, the lower amount you can get is kind of $5,000. So if you just look at if you're not a FinServ organization, perhaps with a lot of heavy hitting audit requirements, you're still going to spend between $5,000 and $10,000 per control on an annualized basis. So what does this mean? When you move to continuous compliance, you really drive through a reusable pattern. So once you look to years 2, 3, 4, 5, it's kind of a no-brainer in terms of being able to understand what kind of impact you can make in a positive way. And the most important question that you want to ask your organization is, hey, if we weren't spending all this time with our compliance and audit activities, what else would we be doing? We'd be innovating, we'd be driving technology, we'd be servicing more customers, we would be granting more time into go-to-market activities and to also make money and affect the bottom line. That's what really we're also talking about is what is really the opportunity cost of time spent with non-revenue generating activities in order to really impact the organization in a way that will show up on the revenue part of the line of your P&L. Brian.
Kathleen, that was fantastic. Thank you very much for getting us going here. And that's some really great data as well. I'm sure that resonates with a lot of folks who are joining us here today. Really, so what we want to talk about now is, why are so many clients choosing ServiceNow as their platform for risk, for compliance, for audit? That's a decision. That's why I brought up earlier, we made the decision here at Edgile for a lot of what we're going to talk about here to go tune our entire business to working exclusively with the ServiceNow platform. I'm sure this slide resonates with a lot of you here today. If you really think about what's been going on in the world over the past 18, 24 months or so, even things that have happened in the past 24, 48, 72 hours, we're seeing a dynamic and complex environment out there where there are a lot of changes happening externally in the world. We're seeing an evolving threat environment. We're seeing things like port shutdown. You're seeing things happen if everyone's trying to build a home right now or do home renovations because you're spending a lot more time at home. I'm sure you've seen dislocated and disrupted supply chains. And then your business is trying to do the right thing and try to react and make things better and make things operate. Unfortunately, what that's causing things to do, though, is that information is being put into silos. People are being reactive and not proactive. The three lines of defense aren't speaking to each other. There's likely duplicative activities that are happening. And that really is having some consequences, I think, in how people are running their businesses today and are really taking more time. To Kathleen's point, you're not being efficient. So your margins and your focus on, those more value-added activities aren't able to happen today because of all of these external pressures, and that people are likely using multiple systems to manage their risk, compliance, and audit initiatives. You see on the next slide, though, by using ServiceNow, what's really great about this then is now that you have one common platform for all lines of defense to work on. So your first, second, and third line of defense arguably can be running all of the risk, compliance, and audit capabilities and functions on the ServiceNow platform. The data and integrations that exist that you need to go effectively run your risk and compliance programs, likely might even natively be there already. Kathleen showed a great slide earlier that talked about ServiceNow being the platform of platforms, of which you have integrations into your ERP systems, for example, or your Salesforce system. I purposely brought up earlier that, we spend a lot of time also with Microsoft and some of the identity platforms because those things already likely are already integrated into ServiceNow. And those are a lot of things that you need to worry about from an audit perspective and from a compliance perspective. So those integrations exist likely with your ServiceNow environment. That data is there. And you also have a platform that your organization likely is very comfortable using. Arguably from day one, when you're onboarding, you might be using a ServiceNow workflow to go get your laptop or to go request access to something, to work with HR in order to do your onboarding. So you're working with a familiar platform, the service catalog, and the workflow that allows people to want to interact with ServiceNow. Not everyone loves doing risk and compliance and audit activities. So, instead of sending someone to a separate system to go deal with those, why not do it on a platform where people are already familiar, usually onboarded, and are able to quickly, work through the process there. So that's why we're seeing this big shift here. And what we're going to talk about now is, David's going to walk us through a couple of the trends and opportunities from a controls modernization standpoint, that will then set us up for the demo that we're going to get into in the system. So with that, I'll pass over to David.
Thank you, Brian. This is David Decter speaking, and I will be sharing 5 trends and opportunities that we're seeing in the controls modernization domain. And it's great to see so many friends and clients on the webinar today. And over the past 20 plus years in the business, I've really come to understand that people genuinely want to do the right thing. But knowing what that is and having the time to do it, however, tends to get in the way. Similarly minded clients are addressing this head on with ServiceNow. And we're helping these clients create a proactive assurance culture whereby ServiceNow is pushing out tickets with automated workflows, notifications, and approvals to go perform the controls, collect the evidence in a single motion. And this approach has been received extremely well across all 3 lines of defense, from the first line control operators to the second line oversight and even the third line audit. So fewer control failures due to non-performance, faster evidence collection and testing, and evidence reuse through evidence warehouse are just a few of those material benefits, which we'll be bringing to life during today's session. Next slide, please. The next major theme we're seeing seems obvious, but without the right technology, it's really hard to do with email and spreadsheets. Workforce member roles and organizational models change at an ever-increasing rate in today's dynamic workplace. We're helping our clients set up their SOC 2, Sarbanes-Oxley, ISO 27001, NIST, et cetera, compliance programs with groups as the control performer as opposed to the individual. So those groups are the control performer, setting up groups as the tester, and this is really avoiding unnecessary overhead of reassigning tasks to individuals. While the group membership ebbs and flows, the initial setup of your ServiceNow solution remains intact. And this saves a lot of time and avoids frustration throughout the organization. Next slide, please. Well, Edgile does most of our work on net new implementations of ServiceNow. We're also frequently engaged to fix failed implementations or refresh the system to prepare organizations to take advantage of all the great new features and capabilities that come with each new release. Quebec, Rome. A common mistake we see is that clients are confusing risks with issues. In other words, issues are being tracked and managed within the risk register as opposed to using the issue and remediation solutions within ServiceNow. And this shift in thinking is really helping clients better avoid blind spots, better prioritize the focus of operational audits, and are really informed by more fact-based risk data points. And that shift in the culture to a more risk-based view. Next slide, please. Over the past 3 years, we've seen the pace of migration away from legacy GRC to ServiceNow IRM accelerate significantly. As more and more capability is stood up on ServiceNow, this brings both opportunity and challenge. Identifying the golden source or that single source of truth for a particular data set, whether that's defining your business hierarchy of the divisions and units, the configuration items, or even business services, organizations should consider refreshing your governance protocols and the related roles and responsibilities. And we've seen a big payback in this investment in terms of improved accuracy and completeness, as well as avoiding redundant work and avoiding having to deconflict the data when different groups frame the problem differently. Next slide, please. Lastly, the three lines of defense are each doing a lot of work. And the chances are the other groups may not be aware of the good work that's being performed, or perhaps haven't thought about how they can leverage one another's results. And we've had tremendous success with clients over the years by taking inventory of what those different assessments and activities include, deconflicting those activities, and then recalibrating the timing of those activities to optimize the reuse of your various artifacts. And with that, I'd like to turn it back over to Brian Risman for a deeper dive on benefits for the three lines of defense.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. And we have some thoughts here about some benefits the three lines of defense would be able to receive and all working in the same platform. But just at a very high level, the picture I paint for a lot of folks is, really about, imagine having everyone being on the same page, the first, second, and third line of defense about what is the risk and control matrix and the scope of an audit or scope of controls that you're going to be subject to that year. Imagine having a common way to share and track issues, remediations, and findings. Just those simplest things, I think, are some of the initial quick wins that we're able to help organizations leverage and take advantage of while being on ServiceNow. I used to, I actually started similar to Kathleen as an auditor back in the day with one of the big four. And, we would show up with a list of controls of what we thought they were. And the business had their set of controls and said, oh, we have a different set. So, those types of simple, quick wins are really some benefits that you can get from being able to have all lines of defense working on the same platform. Really working here from the bottom up, if you will, with the first line. Imagine now being a control performer or someone responsible for executing a control. Imagine now getting a workflow task or a reminder on a daily basis, weekly basis, monthly basis, whatever the frequency of that control is, to be reminded that it's now time to go execute your control and to proactively provide that evidence. We've seen a lot of control failures happen because people have been on vacation, or hasn't been the right protocols or structures in place, to have backups and things like that. Now we have this done in an automated way, with reminders, escalations, and notifications, a really great, simple way to adjudicate and work through your manual controls. From an automation perspective, and we'll talk about that in the system in a minute, how can you set up indicators, and use data to actually have that actually do your control performance itself and not need to do manual testing and can do testing by exception. The second line, imagine having a series of dashboards and reports, being able to monitor control failures, control gaps, and issues, and being able to proactively work with the business to work through those issues and thematically before the auditors come up, both internal and external audit, and being able to try to reduce the number of issues that are coming up. And then to an extent, the third line of defense can look to leverage taking advantage of all the great work being done on the platform already. They might change their audit scope or approach if they're seeing proactive issues identified, or if an issue that was identified last year has now been remediated, they might not need to do the same level of testing. You're able to leverage the data on the platform and really focus on more value-added activities, as Kathleen mentioned about before, instead of working through spreadsheets, emails, et cetera, to work through the audit tasks. So really a lot of benefits from having all three lines of defense working on a common platform. I think really some of the biggest quick wins are getting, some synergies around the risk and control matrices, as well as the ability to track issues and remediation tasks. So with that, we're going to jump into the live demo here. We're going to go through a couple of things. We're going to talk about controls performance from a first line standpoint, talk about controls monitoring from a second and third line perspective. We're going to show one of our solutions called the Evidence Warehouse, which really helps with the adjudication of getting those, those remaining kind of manual required tasks, being able to get those done in a proactive way and reuse evidence multiple times. And we have a couple example use cases that we'll bring this to life for. One is user access reviews. We know that as one of the more common controls that we see to come up from an issue perspective. We also see that being one that's very time consuming and requires a lot of folks in the business to get their fingerprints on. Change management, a lot of you I'm sure are using ServiceNow for change management today, as well as from a fixed assets perspective, thinking about some of those traditional non-IT controls, ones in the business that you would be able to leverage as well. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jay to get us into the system.
Thanks, Brian. So I'll go ahead and pull up the demo, and we're going to start with an example of controls performance. And I think most folks who are familiar with ServiceNow recognize that there's a lot of capability that lives on the platform today, from vulnerability management, security incident response, to change management, and some of our operations, asset management, business management areas. As Kathleen mentioned before, one of the great things about ServiceNow is the vast network of partners. One of those is ClearSky, and what they have here is a built-on now identity platform that allows you to bring all those identity and access controls on platform, allow you to perform those in the system, which in turn can help with some of the continuous performance and continuous monitoring objectives. For today's discussion, we're going to be focusing on a user access review scenario. And so this is just one dashboard that's helping us understand what's going on in terms of the different reviews that are going on, those that are completed, waiting for approval, review in progress, as well as some of our top reviewers, who are the folks who are getting a lot of the requests to go and review access. We're going to be looking at an example here where we're going to review the admin access for ServiceNow using this user access review process. This can be integrated with Active Directory and a number of other systems outside of ServiceNow, but can also be used to help manage the access on the platform. We do this by setting up review templates. And these review templates help us understand, what are we looking at? Are we looking at accounts, entitlements? Which accounts are we looking at? So we can filter to only certain folks within geographic regions, sitting in certain facilities, who have certain job titles. And then we can start looking at the different types of access. In this example, we're looking for active employees or active accounts who have the admin role within ServiceNow. We can then set up how are we going to perform this review. And we're doing a contextual review, and that really means we're looking at the account owner's manager. So we're going to go to the manager and ask them to review this access. If for one reason or another the owner manager is not available or not populated, it will default to J in our example. Last piece here is around the scheduling, and this is where we start to get into some of that continuous performance activities. So not only do we have the capability to find efficiencies in the way we perform these user access reviews, we can set these to be performed on a set interval. So we could look to perform these every 30 days, 60, 90, once a year, depending on the type of access we are reviewing. So once these are set up and we've built out that schedule, these will create new campaigns automatically and gets us into the game of not remembering to go and perform these campaigns, but rather going and executing them. So we'll get notifications and emails when it's time to go out and perform these reviews. I've gone ahead and created a review, and this is, again, that ServiceNow admin review. And this is where we start to go and look at each individual user and determine whether they should continue to have that access. I am one of the reviewers here, and I have a handful of individuals that I need to go and perform this. Just to quickly touch on some of the usability, we're able to include guidance for the managers, for that first line folks who need to understand, what is this? How do I complete this review? And some tips to getting through it in a timely fashion. And then it's just a matter of working through each of these individually. When I click into a user, Ron Kettering in this example, we're looking at that admin role, and we determine, does Ron need to keep this access? And we can either flag it green, keep, or red, disable. And based on this decision, we can trigger the follow-on actions, either automatically deprovisioning that access or triggering tasks to the necessary application teams or help desk teams to take that action. So just another example of some of the continuous controls monitoring, because this is now automated. We're making sure we're engaging the right teams. We're making sure these controls are being performed in a timely fashion. So as we're going through this, we can start to understand, well, are these controls being performed? Are they being performed well in a timely fashion? And that really gets into controls monitoring. You'll start looking at this dashboard here, and this one's showing us, our compliance as an organization. We've identified that there's nearly 25,000 different controls that need to be applied across all of our different applications, our products, our services, different functions. And we can also see, how do we stand? And I think most folks can realize that this is a very daunting number of controls that we potentially want to monitor. Well, Traditionally, that would involve, what Kathleen outlined earlier, documenting the controls, doing design reviews, going out requesting evidence, reviewing that evidence, and determining, is this in line with expectations. And so when we kind of expand beyond that SOC scope, we end up with quite a large number of controls that need to be considered. The example we're going to dig in today is a change control process. So leveraging ServiceNow's change management capabilities. All this functionality lives on platform today. This one here is specifically looking for SAP financial accounting, one of our key applications that has SOX implications. And we can see it's here in this compliant stage. We're also in monitor. We've gone through, we've performed attestations, we reviewed the control and made sure it's appropriate. And now we just want to know if the control is being performed as intended. And we can start to monitor this using what ServiceNow calls indicators. And these are, on-platform versions of the traditional key risk, key performance indicators that most of us are familiar with the added benefit of automating this process. So we can say, well, we want to look at some of the technical review that occurs for changes. We want to look at system change control procedures. And we can see here that these indicators that have been defined have all passed recently. Well, what does that mean? How do we determine that? When we look at the indicator, we can see that it is linked to our application, SAP Financial Accounting. It's linked to the relevant control. And then we have a method in terms of how we're going to go out and determine the results. And so this one here is looking at data from our change request table. We're taking a sample size of 50. So this is an area where there may be a lot of data for the source system or for the process in general, and we need to make sure that we're taking a representative sample. And so this one here is set at a 50 record sample size. So when ServiceNow goes and runs this indicator, it's actually going to gather those 50 records for your review after the fact. We're also able to set up kind of, what sort of criteria are we looking for within the data, and how frequently do we want to run this indicator. This one here is being set up to look at it quarterly. So we'll look at that once a quarter to determine, is the change process being followed. The nice thing is we can define indicator templates. So this is the high level of saying any application that we want to look at for change control process, this is how we can build that out. We can also get very detailed in the way that we build this out. We can take a scripted approach where we are really evaluating that data in a very precise way. So we can really do some deep analysis on that data if necessary. We can also leverage the kind of supporting data and the filters that we defined earlier. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to know when there are problems. If this indicator runs and finds that the change control process is not being followed as intended, that we had maybe an emergency change that was put in without approval, well, let's create an issue for this. Let's really make sure that we understand that there was a problem. Let's identify what sort of remediation steps need to occur so that we can ensure that we fix the process and that this doesn't happen. This obviously was an example in the change management space, but this would be applicable for user access reviews. This would be applicable for vulnerability response, security incident response, or any of the other kind of first line processes that we have within ServiceNow. Maybe one last note before I hand it over to Giovanni would be that we can leverage data off platform as well. So there's obviously an advantage to having that data on platform, but if that's data lives elsewhere, we can look at pulling that in through integration so that we can get similar monitoring capabilities for all of the different areas of your business. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Giovanni, who's going to walk us through the evidence warehouse approach. Really, how can we manage these assurance obligations for areas where the data maybe is not readily available. It's not something that we can leverage continuous monitoring for presently.
Definitely. Thanks, Jay. So this is Giovanni Sparacio speaking. Pleasure to be here with you all today. So what I've done here is I pulled up our evidence warehouse application in ServiceNow, and this is our overview dashboard that you're seeing. So I'll share a bit of the background on the genesis of evidence warehouse. And basically, we've worked with many clients that have multiple siloed functions, oftentimes requesting the same artifacts from the same business owners time and time again. So this is getting into that idea of audit fatigue. So for instance, you might have experienced your internal or external audit functions, or even internal teams like privacy teams or security teams, all effectively asking the same control owners for the same information. So our answer to this problem was to develop what we've called the evidence warehouse. And what's happening on our Built On Now application is that clients who want to be able to assess once, test once, and satisfy many are now equipped with the platform to be able to do so. So within the evidence warehouse here, we have this concept of evidence boxes, and applied to an evidence box is this high-level process that you're seeing along the top. Think of it as a workflow. And so this workflow begins in the draft phase. And this is an empty state where we're defining what the purpose of the box is. How does it relate to the organization? Is it for a particular process or function, or even a facility? Or how does it link to the different controls or regulatory mandates that are informing our program? And effectively, what we're defining here is the evidence box, how it fits in the broader context of the organization, and then what exactly do we want to gather from an evidence or artifact standpoint to support various assurance activities. So as part of this draft stage, this is where we define who's going to gather the evidence. It could be a named individual, it could be a group of individuals. And once we've defined who that is, we can go ahead and send them tasks. And that's what happens in the collection stage of the workflow. So these tasks are sent out. It gives an expected start and end date for the individuals to go collect the requested evidence. And then it's actually gathered from those first line personnel, first line of defense. So once that evidence has been provided, the workflow is going to advance to this review bucket here, where we're confirming that the evidence provided meets what was actually requested. So if we ask for a policy or standard, for example, we're going to want to make sure we receive the governance document. If we ask for screenshots or configuration files, we're going to want to make sure it's what we had originally asked for. And an important thing to note on this stage in the process is that we want to reserve judgment on whether a control is being satisfied when testing is actually being performed. Said differently, this step is really focused on confirming that the evidence supplied meets what was actually requested from that assurance perspective. And then once the review is complete, it advances to this prepared stage in the workflow. And at this point, we're able to link that evidence box that has evidence to different control tests or engagements or audit tests within the system. And when it's linked to a particular engagement, that's when it advances to this supplied stage. And the main difference here is that the supplied state is when the evidence box is being used as evidentiary support to support a particular test or audit. So at this point in time, we would no longer want to be making edits to the content of that box. So we've built the logic into this application where we can lock down the record at that point in time. It becomes read-only, and we can no longer add, remove, or delete files. So the last piece here, this archive stage in the workflow, this is about time bounding these boxes. So we could say this box is valid through the end of the quarter or through the end of the calendar or fiscal year, at which point it would be archived and maintained for historical or document retention purposes. And in addition to archiving these boxes, we can also schedule recollection of evidence. And this is where we get into some of those more tactical, proactive assurance techniques, where if there's a manual process that needs to occur on a fixed frequency, say every 6 or 12 months, we need to go into the system and do something, then how about we request that evidence in line with the control performance frequency? So those first line of defense personnel are actually getting those reminders to go perform their control. They're gathering the evidence right then and there, and then it's being submitted through this automation enabled workflow that it enables you to review the evidence and ensure that it could satisfy the current request as well as any other future audit requests. So what we want to do here is avoid being 3 months down the road, realizing, we didn't perform a certain time-based control. And at this point, there's not much that can be done to remediate that situation. Sure, you could perform the control, but that gap still would have existed for, 3 months. So our evidence warehouse provides an additional mechanism and layer to help steer clear from those situations. So that's the high-level process flow that you're seeing here. I'll pause, see if Brian, David, or Jay have anything to add. And if not, we can actually go look at an evidence box. Sounds good.
Fantastic.
All right, so here we have an inventory of evidence boxes. And you'll note these can be used for both IT and business controls. So whether it's a SOX use case or a non-SOX use case, it works for both. So you'll see a couple examples here. We have a monthly account reconciliation control for your balance sheet. We have a quarterly password configuration setting review control evidence box here for those SOC sensitive systems, for example, that require that quarterly attestation and documentation of controls. So we'll focus on this quarterly password configuration setting control evidence box for now. And when we launch it, you'll see we have the name of the evidence box. We've indicated that Abel and Don, the control owners, are going to be the collectors of this evidence and will be responsible for submitting it. You'll note that we've required this needs a review. And then we've also got this widget here for enabling auditor access. So we have roles and access control that can allow external regulators or other parties to come in and see these documents as well. So that's another mechanism to alleviate that audit fatigue that we oftentimes see. And then down here in the review tab, we've indicated that Beth Anglin will be the reviewer for the evidence that's ultimately submitted by these control owners. So as I scroll down, you'll see that this evidence is set to recollect. So we have the ability to define that frequency. We have the quarterly frequency here, and then we get this suggested date that's mid Q4 when we're going to want to go do that again as the year comes to a close. And we also have this archival functionality that we talked about. So for instance, we could set it for year end just before that roll forward period to close out an annual audit, and then that's when we lock this evidence box down for Q3 evidence that we're talking about. So I'll come down here, you'll see some menus here. We have collection tasks. So the classic example here is you're going to want that control owner approval for those password configuration settings, and you're going to want the actual evidence with that timestamp for audit documentation purposes. So these are enumerated here where you can go in, you can go in, we see a description for this task to provide evidence that demonstrates the Active Directory password configuration setting review is actually occurring and being approved and signed off and saying, hey, this meets what's stipulated in our IT security policies. So as an example, I'll go in here, choose an attachment, and we'll put the review and approval in there. It'll upload, and you can see that we now have attachments here. So as I back out into the evidence box, we have the ability to see, sorry, excuse me. Yeah, we have the ability to upload the documents. And then as we go back in that evidence collection box, we can see the attachments up top, and we get that holistic view of the data.
Yeah, and I think that the big piece here, Gio, is that we can start to link this to other parts in GRC. We can link this to the different control objectives, the different individual entities, those being applications, processes, functions. Think of your traditional audit universe. And then to the different authority documents, those would be your laws, regulations, and best practices, and really helps us find this information when we need it. So if someone comes in and asks for a specific package as it relates to SOX or as it relates to FFIEC or any of our other regulations, it's something that we can easily find and prepare in short order. So
definitely, but yeah, so that concludes our demo here. I'll turn it back over to Brian here.
Perfect. Well, thanks, guys. That was great. Always good to bring this to life and show people that this is live in action. We're happy to deep dive on some of these topics, a bit further with some folks who would like to. So please certainly reach out. I do know we just have a few minutes left here. Want to make sure that we're respectful of everyone's time. Before we get into just to summarizing the benefits and how to get started, wanted to just make sure we had a chance to take a couple of the questions. We've been answering some of the questions live in the QA chat. A few others have come up, though, that we want to make sure that we address. Jay, I'm going to put you back on the spot to get us going here. That all seemed great what you and Giovanni just went through, but how long is this going to take me? Is this a half a year investment, a full year investment? What does a project like this look like in order to get folks up and running, not only on ServiceNow IRM, but also with some of this, continuous performance and monitoring capabilities?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as part of Edgile service offering, we have what we call quick starts. It's really intended to get folks up and running in kind of 8 to 10 weeks on most of these capabilities. So, having risk, compliance, control testing, all built out, operational within kind of that 10-week or so range. That's really the first step in a crawl, walk, run approach. And so get you up and running using the native capabilities. And then we start to build on with the different indicators and continuous monitoring techniques. A lot of times organizations have this defined today. They're manually gathering that information, and we can start to bring that on platform, start to automate that over time. So really we're talking, weeks, couple of months, we're not talking years to get to a very mature state.
Fantastic. Thanks, Jay. And Kathleen, I know I'm happy to answer this question with you, but maybe wanted to bring you in here. A lot of folks are starting this journey, and they come ask us, they come ask you from ServiceNow, where do we typically start, in order to get some high value, quick wins? Any thoughts from your standpoint? And I'm happy to jump in as well.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think one of the North Stars that I've found in the commonalities of where it's best to start is picking a process that's defined, that is established, right? You're not kind of seeking for that baseline. It's already well in place. So there's something to work off of. And then the PR part of that is getting running that with a group that's open to change. So I remember a client we worked with back in the years that on the process program part, check. But the people that were in this group were kind of former detectives, like pen and paper detectives, and they just really struggle with adapting new technology. So they didn't really meet the punch. But I think where you're able to show quick wins fast, so that the organization can understand, and making sure that group can be your cheerleaders to tell their buddies at the virtual water cooler, right, what happened whenever they went through the program is really important. So what have you seen, Brian and team?
Yeah, Kathleen, absolutely. I think that's right. You need a quick win, and I think that's why this type this more agile style approach often, or hybrid agile, makes sense, so that you're not waiting for every single requirement with every single business stakeholder aligned before you can start making progress. So one of the typical kind of tangible use cases we see, people start with, not only from a net new implementation, but also if you're migrating from a legacy GRC platform to a modern IRM solution like ServiceNow, is like findings and issues management. So if you think about all the issues and findings that might come from all the internal, external audits, self-identified issues, but let's just bring those all into ServiceNow. Let's get everyone on the same page. We can do that in weeks, get folks up and running. So I think that's one of the use cases we see folks get up and running quite quickly with. And then, then from there you build on, how do we get now issues automatically generated? And from there you start, continuing that journey. So I think that's one of the places we see folks typically start. But we need to get quick wins. You need to be done in weeks, really not months or years. And then I think from there you build a smart roadmap and journey for people to expand with. I do want to ask one more question, and then we're going to do the wrap up here. And this one, I'm going to pass over to David. What are some of the benefits that we've seen around continuous controls, monitoring and performance, for internal audit? Because I know we have some folks from that group today here on the call.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so, I think as we look at the benefits, it's probably twofold. On the one hand, you have a better awareness, better situational awareness of where potential problems are flaring up. Rather than waiting for 6-12 months or the 3-year audit cycle to pick it up, you're alerted much earlier. And then in a similar vein, you're also able to make course corrections before you're hit with material weakness or the like, and kind of remediate as well. So both better early alerting, and you're able to reposition some of your audits, and then similarly for say the first line of defense, they can go fix this and avoid a material weakness later. Thanks, Brian.
David, those are great points. At ServiceNow, we talk about drinking our own champagne, so we use all our own stuff. But I was working with our internal audit team. He had told me that before they integrated our ITM asset management solution and the integrated risk management solution, their team alone on the audit testing side, David, it took them 2 months to get through that audit, talking interviews, screenshots, follow up on the exceptions, and they've been able to reduce that to a week with that CCM integration. So they were pleased because they had more interesting audits they wanted to do more than fixed assets. So it's a great point.
Not fantastic. Well, I know we're near the top of the hour. Quickly here, here's some 5 tips to get started. We're going to share this deck with everybody. And then one thing just to really note on the right-hand side, as well as around building a sustainable solution. This is not about just turning some screws and configurations and we think magic happens. We're running, we're running assurance programs, compliance programs, with the risk lens. And we need to make sure that, when we implement solutions, we're thinking about governance, roles, responsibilities, obviously ServiceNow as a technology, et cetera, in order to have a robust solution to sustain this. So, we'll share these tips with you all as it relates to getting started. And with that, I'll turn it over to Kathleen to get us to wrap up.
Yeah, absolutely. I can tell by the questions that were both posted as well as privately that I've seen go back and forth. There's a lot more questions, a lot more topics. Trust me when I say the Edgile team here can talk about the bits and bytes of getting through each step in immense detail that will really help to provide you guys with kind of a roadmap of how to make this happen in your organization. So I encourage you to follow up with Brian and team, follow up with my team as well. I can get you to the right people too if you have any tech questions, but we're both, Brian and I talk multiple times a week. So we're both here to help, and I really appreciate you guys' time and attendance, as well as comments and questions. So really look forward to hearing from all of you.